Every major leap in finance follows the same pattern. First, the rails change, then the institutions change. And only at the very end does the money itself start moving differently. We've reached that last phase, and almost no one sees it happening. When people talk about real utility, the focus usually lands on XRP and Ripple's settlement dollar. But that's not where utility actually lives. The real story sits underneath, in the quiet decisions banks and corporates make when they change how money moves across borders. Over the last few years, those decisions have started to shift. Corridors that once depended on pre-funded Nostro accounts and end-of-day netting are being pulled onto real-time rails, where regulated digital dollars and neutral routing assets now do the work that batch systems and manual processes used to handle. On the surface, this transition looks slow. Underneath, the physics of settlement are being rewritten. If you stay at the headlines, it feels like nothing is happening. But once you step into the plumbing, the picture flips. New corridors coming online one by one, treasurers rewriting liquidity rules, and routing engines quietly choosing the path with the cleanest mix of depth, compliance, and finality. That's where XRP and Ripple's settlement dollars show up. Not as hype, but as functioning parts of the machinery. Everything here is for educational and entertainment purposes only, not financial advice. Always do your own research before making any investment decisions. If clear, no hype crypto education helps you make sense of all this. Hit like and subscribe. It tells YouTube this series is worth showing to other newcomers, and it helps me keep building it for you. In this final chapter of the series, we are going to stay inside that machinery. No forecasts, no hopium, just the ramp. Corridor expansion, real-time versus batch liquidity, reflexive loops in AMMV2 and RLUSD pools, RWA, and collateral flows, and how treasuries behave once money stops waiting for the next batch window to move. The first misconception we have to clear is the idea that global adoption flips on like a light switch. That is not how regulated settlement works. Banks, payment providers, and corporates move corridor by corridor, use case by use case, with real money at stake in each experiment. A single corridor might start with low limits and strict monitoring between two highly regulated partners. Compliance teams make sure KYC and sanctions logic map to the new rail. Operations teams test reconciliation and reporting. Treasury asks one question over and over again. If we push volume through this thing, can we still see, manage, and forecast risk in the way our governance requires? When those answers are satisfactory, limits rise. Another corridor is onboarded. A second institution in the same region joins. Over time, a set of point-to-point experiments starts to look like a network. From the outside, this can appear as a series of small announcements. From the inside, it is a ladder. Each rung adds more flows that must be funded, hedged, and settled in real time. That ladder matters because it changes time. Traditional correspondent banking is built on the idea of batch windows. You queue flows, you net them, and you settle the residual. Treasurers think in terms of end of day and T+1. Liquidity is sized for peaks at very specific points in the cycle. When a corridor moves to real-time settlement, those assumptions break. Payments no longer wait politely for the next window. They arrive whenever customers send them, and the expectation is that they settle in minutes, not days. The difference is not cosmetic. It wipes out a lot of the slack that batch systems use to hide inefficiencies. Mechanically, that means two things. First, the institution needs continuous access to settlement assets instead of periodic access. Second, risk and reconciliation models have to deal with a stream of final states, not a few large batches. The rail is faster, but the liquidity requirement is more demanding. There is less room for, "we will fix it at the end of the day," and more pressure on, We have to be funded now. There is an assumption that faster settlement automatically means less capital is needed. In practice, especially in early stages, the opposite tends to be true. Treasurers, by design, are conservative. When they move onto a new rail, they do not start by shaving buffers. They start by increasing them. Imagine a Gulf bank and an Asian bank connected over a real-time corridor. Instead of pooling idle balances in a Nostro account and relying on end-of-day netting, each side now has flows that can arrive at any moment. The safe response is to hold more accessible, high-quality liquidity in the instruments that actually settle those flows. That might be local fiat accounts, but increasingly, it also includes regulated digital dollars, like RLUSD. So, as corridors switch to real-time, two things grow together: the volume of flows and the always-on liquidity dedicated to backing those flows. That is the beginning of structural demand. Not for speculation, but for inventory. That has to sit on balance sheet and in custody systems to make sure nothing fails when the next payment instruction hits the rail. Inside that inventory picture, Ripple's settlement dollar and XRP serve two very different purposes. The stablecoin behaves like bank-grade digital cash. It fits cleanly into cash policies, reserve models, and collateral frameworks. A treasurer can treat it as a dollar-denominated settlement asset held with a regulated custodian and integrated directly into their treasury management system. XRP's role is different. It functions as the routing leg. Not because anyone is trying to speculate with it, but because in a landscape full of local currencies, stablecoins, and tokenized deposits, institutions sometimes need a neutral asset with real, multi-corridor liquidity to link markets that don't connect directly. In a straightforward corridor where the stable settlement dollar has deep pairs on both ends, a flow might move from fiat to digital cash and straight back to fiat with no visible bridge asset in between. But once you connect several corridors and multiple currency pairs, routing engines begin to score all possible paths. If the best execution happens by moving through the stable dollar into XRP and back out again, with tighter spreads and cleaner settlement, that's the route that wins. Not because of narrative, but because the math demands it. Now layer in the liquidity architecture of the XRPL itself, with AMM version 2, concentrated liquidity bands, and unified routing between pools and order books. The ledger is built to reward depth exactly where real flow shows up. That's where the reflexive loop begins. Early on, institutions and professional market makers seed pools anchored in Ripple's settlement dollar, along with bridges into XRP. Corridor flow is small at first, but every trade generates fees and, in some cases, scheduled rewards. As those fees accumulate and the pools prove stable, more capital concentrates in the same ranges. Depth improves, spreads tighten, routing engines become comfortable, sending larger tickets through those paths. Treasury desks watch that progression. They see that routes anchored in digital dollars and, when needed, XRP, deliver consistent execution and fast finality. Confidence rises. Limits increase. More corridor volume shifts from legacy rails to the new one. That added flow feeds the pools again, increasing fees and on-ledger depth. The loop is simple. Flow deepens liquidity, and deeper liquidity attracts more flow. The entire cycle is structural, not sentimental. So far, we've stayed in the payments lane, but real-world assets add a quieter second layer to the same ramp. Once tokenized treasuries, money market funds, and other RWAs are issued on or bridged into XRPL connected infrastructure, Ripple's settlement dollar stops being just a payments tool. It becomes the cash leg for portfolio shifts and collateral movements. A corporate treasury might hold working balances in that digital dollar for cross-border activity, place excess into tokenized short-term treasuries, and post part of it as collateral for trading or hedging. Every shift between those buckets is a settlement event. Some stay entirely inside the digital dollar environment. Others need an XRP-routed path to reach certain venues, currencies, or instruments. The key point is that these flows are recurring and policy-driven. They show up in monthly rebalances, quarterly reports, and intraday margin calls. None of them rely on social media narratives. They rely on whether Ripple's settlement dollar and XRP sit in the right place in the stack to make these movements the simplest, cleanest option for institutions that don't care about crypto culture at all. From a treasurer's perspective, this isn't a story about XRP versus something else. The real question is whether the combination of Ripple's settlement dollar, XRP, and the surrounding custody and brokerage stack makes day-to-day liquidity management easier or harder. When real-time corridors are wired directly into Treasury platforms, the picture changes. Dashboards begin showing a consolidated view, digital dollar balances across entities, corridor-level flow patterns, and exposure broken out by currency and rail. Policies can then be set. Minimum balances in key hubs, maximum unhedged FX, and triggers for moving funds into or out of tokenized RWAs. Once those rules are in place, a lot of the behavior becomes automated. A surge in outbound payments on one corridor might trigger a small XRP-routed top-up from another hub. A large inflow might sweep into tokenized treasuries. These adjustments happen at machine speed, but they're grounded in board-approved risk frameworks. Each one is another example of Ripple's settlement dollar and XRP being used simply because they're wired into the right levers, not because anyone is watching a chart. Looking ahead, the landscape only becomes more fragmented. Central banks testing CBDCs, banks issuing tokenized deposits, fintech firms launching regulated stablecoins, and asset managers tokenizing funds will not converge on one universal standard. They'll create islands of liquidity, each with its own rules and settlement preferences. In that kind of world, routing becomes the real competition. The assets and rails that win are the ones that fit inside multiple policy frameworks at once, acceptable as collateral, available through regulated custody, integrated directly into routing engines, and compliant across jurisdictions. Ripple's settlement dollar is built to serve as that cash leg. XRP is positioned to function as the neutral connector between those islands. So when a routing engine evaluates 2 or 3 possible paths and selects a route that moves through XRP and anchors back into Ripple's dollar, it isn't endorsing a narrative. It's solving an optimization problem. Cost, depth, speed, regulatory friction, fail risk, all get scored. The path with the best composite score is the one that gets used. And if that path consistently runs through XRP and Ripple's settlement dollar, that's where structural utility emerges. Full stop. We opened this series with a simple tension. If so much infrastructure is already in place, why does adoption still look slow from the outside? By now, that tension should feel different. Institutions don't move in one dramatic leap, and they certainly don't move because of narratives. They move when the settlement ramp is ready. When corridors are wired, liquidity is available. Compliance is satisfied, and treasurers are confident they can operate on it. XRP and Ripple's settlement dollar aren't magic keys that unlock that future on their own. They're instruments placed in very specific positions inside that ramp. The digital dollar sits at the center as regulated cash. XRP acts as the neutral routing asset that turns fragmented liquidity into a functional network. AMM version 2, real-world assets and real-time treasury workflows simply give that architecture more surface area for real flows to express themselves. If you want to understand where XRP actually fits in the new financial operating system, you have to focus on the mechanics we've walked through. How corridors expand, how liquidity requirements change, how routing engines behave, and how treasury incentives drive real usage. That's where utility stops being a slogan and becomes something you can measure. To understand the full architecture behind XRP's real-world role, explore the entire 5-part series, How Ripple is Rebuilding Global Finance. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next deep dive. This channel is for educational and entertainment purposes only. and is not financial advice. Always do your own research and keep the discussion respectful. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking, subscribing, leaving a comment, or sharing it with a friend.